Yeah, admitting all now.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, admitting all now.
Yogesh, maybe we can begin.
Yeah, all right. So, good evening, everyone. Varshit, can you please make speakers co-host for the evening?
Yes,
So
definitely.
yeah. Is that done?
Yeah, you should please continue.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. Representing IBLoT's team, we are happy to bring another exciting panel discussion on science communication to all of you. There will be three components of this evening, starting with IBLoT's introduction, followed by the panel discussion, and in the end, we'll have breakout rooms where you can interact with the speakers one-on-one, ask the questions you may have. Feel free to drop all your questions in the chat box as well, and or in the WhatsApp group if you're already part of it. And yeah, with that, just quickly sharing my screen to take you through the presentation about IBLoT. So at IBLoT, we envision to bridge the gaps in the Indian bioeconomy by helping one leader at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you just restart again? Your screen wasn't visible for a second. Please continue.
Okay, is it visible now?
Yes.
Cool, perfect. So at IBLoT, the tagline is to bridge the gaps in the Indian bioeconomy by helping one leader at a time. And the mission statement, there are two components of the mission statement. First is to build a very multidisciplinary community of emerging biotech leaders. And second is to parallelly research on the gaps which exist in the bioecosystem. And the vision is to have an ecosystem where young and like existing and future leaders can collaborate to solve the problems which are pressing in the emerging Indian bioeconomy. The goals is to build a community and enable networking, at the same time publish content and have discussions around that. Today's initiative is something which is in the second bucket. We also focus on entrepreneurial skill development and overall help in bridging the gaps in the Indian bioeconomy. The gaps which we focus on are innovative research ecosystem, entrepreneurial skill development, deep tech integration, healthcare affordability, accessibility and quality, sustainability in food and agriculture, and around policy when it comes to regulatory and ethics. There are a few events which we have planned in the upcoming future, which include networking events, more panel discussions, webinars, and workshops. Varshit is leading the content team, publishing white papers and blogs on our Medium platform. And we have a mentorship program which is currently in progress. This is focusing on young entrepreneurs. So if there is anyone in the audience today who is starting off on their own, feel free to reach out to us and we may have something to help you out. Then there are bioentrepreneurship competitions and hackathons, which are also being planned. In the past, we have held several events ranging from AMA, AUA sessions, community meetups for members already on the Slack channel, and panel discussions on topics pertinent to the bio ecosystem. In our community, we have almost 1,500 followers on LinkedIn and almost 250 members on Slack. These members are from a wide variety of background. On the channel, we enable people to network with each other and share insights we gain on the Indian bioecosystem. And there are many members-only events which are currently in pipeline, and we want to go live with them soon. And we also enable job opportunities and career advice by helping people connect with each other. The new Slack channels which we have are aspiring entrepreneurs and early stage entrepreneurs. So if you fall under this category, please do check out and network with people already on board. This is the team. We are a 9-member team. We thank you so much for attending the session today. You can reach out to us on iblot.web@gmail.com or just visit our website if you have any questions. Yeah. So with this, I hand it over to Varshit to introduce the speakers of today's evening and get started with the panel discussion. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Yogesh, for a fantastic introduction to the evening. And a warm welcome to everyone, each and every one of you who has joined us on this evening on a weekday, 6 p.m. Thank you very much. And we look forward to a fantastic discussion today. So our theme of today's event is around science communication. And I believe that is something which we all may have come across in various times in our scientific journey and career, but at the same time might have been very, very frustrated and annoyed during this particularly past 2 years or so, when there has been so much discussion, but which has been adulterated with a lots of miscommunication, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and whatnot. And the challenge with that ends up being is the scientists often do not have an option to come on a proper forum and explain their ideas in a simpler, distilled words to the wider audience. At the same time, a general audience often lack the tools to critically analyze and understand. And with this particular event, we hope to sort of bridge that gap together. And that's really has been our motivation around science communication. And we want to tackle various different aspects of it, including starting from just an academic communication, which distills down how a scientific research from the data could be converted into a published format, as well as spread across forward to the general public, which they could use to understand policies and discussions better. We also want to talk about the themes around science journalism, which would be discussed around how science could be reported and investigated, so that people like a lot of you can understand and have an idea on what it takes to critically examine other people's research. And finally, we're going to discuss a lot about careers in science communication, because it's not just relegated to 2 or 3 arcane career options, but there is a plethora of opportunities, and we're going to be discussing around that. And for that, today we have a let's say generous lineup of 3 fantastic experts in this particular field. First of all, I would like to introduce Shubhra Priyadarshini with us. So Shubhra is an award-winning science journalist and a current editor of Nature India. Nature India is part of Nature Portfolio, which is in turn part of the prestigious Nature publication group, perhaps one of the best research journal in the world. She has an interesting background, because she did not start it off as a scientist in life sciences, but actually had an out of science background, and started off working with different major dailies such as Times of India, Indian Express, and then moved with Down to Earth, which is which is a very popular science magazine, and worked around there, and worked with international outlet as well as Observer London. She has a lot of experience along with accolades in the field. She is a British Chevening Scholar, a Robert Bosch Fellow, IREX UNESCO Fellow, Kavli Prize Media Scholarship Awardee, and has been on international committees such as World's Conference of Science Journalists and BRICS Young Scientist Forum. So there's a lot of information and insights we can get from Shubhra. So I recommend all of you to ask your questions from the bottom of your heart and just get to know whatever you can. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Mohit Kejoli, who is an assistant professor at an Institute of Science, and he is a professional scientist, but he's also a passionate science communicator. He ever since his undergraduate days from IIT Kanpur, he started the he started the science magazine there, which is called Nerd. And once he moved to PhD at Rice University, he didn't. While along with the research, he kept doing communication work and did volunteer with the, actually act as a consultant with the written, oral, and visual communication group. And ever since returning back to Institute of Science, he has been leading, working with the Center of Science and Policy, grooming young scientists, not in the ways of just science, but actually how to communicate them better. And finally, I would like to introduce, along with us, Abhishek Pal, who is a trained microbiologist and a very, let's say, experienced science communicator in not so conventional areas, which I was been hinting about. He has more than 14 years of experience working across cell therapies, oncology, and vaccine. And with latest, he works as a scientific communication director at cell and gene therapy with Novartis Oncology. And he is deeply rooted into science communication ecosystem in his own words. And if people want to get to know, let's say, hidden corners and how to build a career and get more rare advice on how to build one in it, Abhishek is the person you would want to talk to. And I know we have some fantastic personalities, so I don't want to be the guy talking too much. So with that, I would really like everyone to just give a round of applause for these people who have just shown up here and just to share their insights. And with that, we would just like to kickstart the panel discussion. So thank you, Shubhra, Mohit, and Abhishek for joining us with us today.
Varshit, just one note. To the participants, you guys can leave your comments in the chat and we'll pick it up and ask the panelists towards the end. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. So guys, just so Srinath mentioned, please feel free to just drop your comments in the chat and pick them up. So right off the bat, we would just like to address the elephant in the room, and with this particular question: why scientists need to communicate? Like, isn't just bench job and modeling just the real work? And with that, I would like Professor Mohit to just take on to that question first.
Thanks, Varshit. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Varshit, and the entire IBLoT team for organizing this fantastic panel discussion. And looking forward to learning from the questions as well as from the other panelists who are known for quite some time and followed their work. So that's an excellent question to begin with. Let's just continue doing our experiments and simulations and whatever field trips and other aspects of scientific methodology and data collection that people engage in depending on the discipline, and not worry about communicating it. So in today's world, that will lead to a death in the career. Period. You will not publish. It's a simple publish or perish paradigm which is following, right? That's reason number one. Then when we talk about moving ahead, when we talk about establishing collaborations, networking, forming teams, forming large contingents, and again, COVID provided us a fantastic opportunity. There were scientists, virologists, immunologists, epidemiologists, mathematical modelers, economists, policymakers, etc. And again, Shubhra and Abhishek can speak much more about the entire ecosystem than I can. They all came together to reflect on and to advise about various different policy decisions that were being made and that were being dynamically changed as well, not only in the country, but worldwide. So if you do not speak to people who speak a different language because you have a common problem to address, then again, your relevance in this hyper-competitive world would be rolled out very soon, and you would be restricted to being in the pigeonhole that you are at right now. So by not communicating science, by not choosing to reaching out, let alone the other reasons why science communication to public is important, which again, the other experts can talk much more about. But even at a professional level, I think that is basically committing suicide.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mohit. I think you brought up a wonderful point around reaching out and starting conversation so that everybody can come onto the same page, same table, and we can have a more productive conversation. And I think, Shubhra, you have a lot of experience reaching out to various different scientists and non-scientists as well, and reaching out and talking to different people. Perhaps you could just bring that perspective in. How has your experience been talking in Indian ecosystem as well as outside, and any other points you would like to share?
Oh, certainly. I do think that Mohit started off with some harsh words, and many times harsh words shake us up more than friendly suggestions or advice. So yes, Mohit, you're right. I mean, in today's professional and academic ecosystems, you do not publish, you tend to perish in a few years. But having said that, I also think that there are many scientists who have not published so well and still have done, not in the academic sense, but have really contributed to science way beyond, or communication way beyond just academic papers. So I would think it's a double-edged sword, and my reasons to advocate for science communication would be in two categories. One is the altruistic reasons why you should communicate science. You are sort of scotching pseudoscience, anti-science, and that's on top of my list because of COVID, because of what we've just gone through. People who have, come across pieces of pseudoscience, misinformation in real time, have got up and said, let me come out and, among scientists, let me come out and scotch this bit of misinformation as a duty towards humankind. So on top of my list is why you should communicate science, because you are responsible in some way or the other to scotch that kind of anti-science belief or fake news. The second most important for me would be to inform people about science. All of us know about sports stars, we know about film stars, we know about our politicians. How many of us know about our rock star scientists? And that's a term I use deliberately because we do not have too many voices at least in the Indian scenario, and it's the same globally as well. So raising awareness about not just science, but also about your own discipline, and very importantly, inspiring the next generation of researchers. That's something that science communication does. Think of the number of books that you read as a child, or think of an article that you read as a child that inspired you to come to science. So isn't it time for you to give back what you got? So I would think those are the very altruistic reasons, and the practical reasons why you should do science communication would be you are, if not anything, developing a new skill. You are raising your own and your institute's profile. You are improving the quality of your research. You are, like Mohit mentioned, networking better. You are in terms of getting the next tranche of your funding, sort of increasing funding to your research. You are, in terms of reaching out, actually increasing the impact of your work. So that's already 10 reasons why you should communicate science and why you should go out and do it well. So yeah, that would be from me.
Thank you very much, Shubhra, for a lot of insightful points there. At this point of time, I think I would just like Abhishek to jump in, because your kind of communication, science communication, is a little different from what we've discussed until now. It's about academic and then public outreach of the academic work. But what you do is like industry-specific research, which is geared again towards the experts in the field. So which is a bit of a different trajectory altogether. So perhaps you might want to just share your ideas here and see, what it is and why does that matter in conjunction to the other points.
Thanks, Varshit. I'll share my points. However, I have to admit the fundamentals of communication or science communication, they don't change even if you change the line of investigation that you're doing or the research you're doing. A lot of the points that Mohit mentioned, because we do work closely with our physicians, right? So essentially from an industry perspective, we don't do our publications just by ourselves. It's not like we do our drug development, we do our trials, and we just publish our own data. We have to work with the clinicians who actually drive the trials, who partner with us essentially to create the narratives, talk about the data, talk about the interpretation. So from that angle, I would still say we are very closely connected with the research community, the clinician community per se. And then their needs are still what Mohit said. They still are worried about publish or perish. To what Shubhra said, that just publishing a paper these days isn't enough. You need to talk about your work. You'll see a lot more activity from journals, from publishers, from conferences on social media and other platforms where they're talking about research that are happening. And the idea is that you talk more, it's democratizing science. You are making it accessible to more people. You brought up an interesting point. You would think that our primary target when we do a publication in the New England Journal, our primary audience are clinicians or experts. But now we have slowly started widening that audience group to non-specialists, for example. They're still physicians, but non-specialists. They could be nurses and allied staff. There's a lot more focus on patient involvement in trial, in the research community, as well as, access for information. So we have to do simpler stuff in order to provide that access to them. I'm not saying dumb down science. It's simpler stuff, which is easy for them to understand while retaining the accuracy and validity. So I think in all these aspects, the fundamentals of science communication still hold true. Who are your target audience? What are you trying to communicate? What's the right time? What's your message? What's your channel? Right? So these things will apply to any kind of communication. So from an industry perspective, I think now more than ever, we partner very, very closely with not just physicians and institutes, but also the, societies, the medical societies and others, to really co-create a lot of materials, non-branded, disease-specific awareness as well. So, and you asked a question to Shubhra about what's the ecosystem like in India. It's now more than ever before that the scientific communication ecosystem is buzzing. You could see a lot more activity from academicians. If you look at Twitter, I can rattle out names to you. Shubhra and Mohit knows all of them. You have Cyrio, you have India Biosciences, you have whatnot, and individuals. I don't want to name and offend others if I miss out their names, but they're doing a lot to bring scientists together and to talk about their research, highlight and spotlight, female scientists, talk about hidden talent, everything. And pharma industry, I think, has also understood that. So that Novartis has a huge center at Hyderabad. We have 150 writers who develop content, publications, medical education, digital content, everything. I used to be at GSK earlier. They have recreated the team in Bangalore. Lilly has around 100 writers in Bangalore. You have Merck opening in Bangalore. You have now Sanofi, which is in Hyderabad, which has around 50, 60 writers. So, it's buzzing. And then you have agencies, right? You have scientific communication agencies like Indegene and Cactus. So, it's a huge ecosystem now, plus digital agencies. So I think there's a lot of opportunity now in the ecosystem that India has to switch, and I think that there were a lot of questions around career movement. So I think, yes. And then science journalism is a whole different ballgame altogether.
All right. Thank you very much, Abhishek. I'm glad that you ended the note on the science journalism, because that's where I was actually going to head with that. So Shubhra, you have a lot of experience in science journalism. And one particular thing which comes up is do you actually need to have a degree in science to become a science journalist? And I think you're really best positioned to, to answer that. To what degree do you need to be specialized in science, and how does that make a difference?
Yeah, the best science journalists I know don't have a degree in science. So upfront answering your question. But having said that, there are a lot of scientists who have now become great science journalists. And I can again rattle off a couple of names, but then not at the cost of offending the others I lose out on. However, when we began doing science, it was a nascent, almost like a greenfield area. 25 years back, a bunch of us started doing science journalism in India, mentored by the first science journalist of this country, Dr. K.S. Jayaraman, who's now in his late 80s, but still a prolific writer, and he writes for Nature India. And the first thing that he told us is that you need not know what the concepts are behind each of those high and mighty scientific ideas, but you have to know where to get them and how to really understand them from where they are, in the papers, in the conferences, how to get to those things and then come back and get to those people who understand them better than you. And then sort of over the years, as you do write, pieces, journalistic pieces, you get into the mold of a scientist. How would that scientist be thinking when he was doing this research? What would be his way of approaching the question, the central problem that he or she or they are approaching? And then from there, you take out the gist of that particular story, as we call it in journalistic parlance, and then you go out into meeting more experts, more voices, create a story around that particular area of science or discipline of science, and understand what would be of relevance to your audience. So a science story or a journalistic story is different from your academic paper in the very basic thing that it's a piece of journalism. It's here and now. You cannot write about a vaccine that is developed or has been given the nod by the government today after a month. You have to write it in tomorrow's newspaper, in tomorrow's magazine, or the news media that you represent. So that's the very basic difference between academic writing and science journalism. So I think you need not be a specialist, but if you have a flair for understanding all kinds of sciences, all kinds of disciplines, and then breaking it down for your own audience, it could be a specialist audience, it could be educationists, it could be policymakers, it could be just the lay public, it could be anybody, but where you begin your story is where your audience is and what they would understand. So the catch-all phrase that we use is, will your grandma understand what you're writing or saying? Will your 10th grade nephew or niece understand what you're saying? So that's where we begin for all our journalistic stories. In some places, we use jargons, but then it's upon us to make sure that our audience understand those jargons already. Or we have to simplify them, those jargons, not dumb down like Abhishek did mention, not dumb them down, but make it clear to your audiences. So there's a whole bunch of things that you need, in terms of skills to become a science journalist. And one of them, and the foremost, is to be able to present the science in a palatable manner. If you're writing about it, then to have a flair for writing. If you're presenting it in the audiovisual format, then you must know what buzzes with the audience.
Thank you very much, Shubhra. Just a bit of a follow-up on a question on that. So you give a lot of important points around how to have a right balance between making it palatable while having certain jargons just so that it doesn't get dumbed down. So in that context, I would like you to share, what do you think, like the two more, let's say one technical skills like that is paramount for people from non-scientific background to, let's say, report stories in science. And perhaps another thing would be, what has been your biggest challenge as an outsider in science to break into this, sector and trying to make your own place and name in it, because it can be sometimes a world community and does not appreciate people outside. So could you just highlight on that?
Yeah. So the first thing is like everybody says, when you approach a question or a problem, you approach it as a non-specialist. So that actually really opens up a lot of doors. So when you say, I don't know anything about this, or this is my basic knowledge about this particular issue or paper or problem in science or this scientific discipline, immediately the people you're approaching understand your level of understanding. And then they'll open up to you from that level of understanding. And that actually really works well for a non-specialist. For a specialist, say Abhishek or Mohit, they would already have a basic level of knowledge about what they want to write about. And then sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, sometimes that could be inhibitive. That could actually, make you think, oh, why wouldn't people understand this jargon? Or why wouldn't, I use it every day. So I would think that, a public or people whom I am addressing would understand this, say, alphabet soup. At times we talk to scientists and we have to stop them at every sentence saying, I didn't get that one. So can you just explain what that means? And so that's how you sort of navigate your way into it. To the second part of your question, I really haven't met too many scientists who have, I have met my bunch of arrogant or sort of closed scientists who are not open to communicating or making you understand the basic concept if you were to nudge them or nag them beyond the point. But throughout my career, I have received a huge lot of cooperation from people who have tried and made me navigate tough concepts. So I cannot afford to say I don't understand astrophysics, or I don't understand neuroscience, or I don't know how medicine works. I really have to do that homework on my own and then go prepared with a background to the person I'm approaching. And of course, read up. That's the basic. If you are doing a story, you perhaps have read up 20 papers already in that area, leading ones, and spoken to at least a couple of people who understand those concepts better than you. And then you're approaching that person that you want to quote. So you shouldn't come from a level of total ignorance, but you should have done your background, you should have done your homework, and then you're approaching these people. So many times in science journalism, you again cannot afford to have a lot of background. The news is breaking today, and you have to report it tonight, or this evening, or within 5 hours or 2 hours. The deadlines are really sharp. And so what you do is you just give up and say, I have this basic knowledge. Can you just come on board and tell me what I'm missing? And or can you just de-jargonize this for me? Or can you just tell me where I can find more sources to understand this concept or this story better? So yeah, it works in here and now, as I said, and there are challenges. And the most difficult one for me is to meet people who wouldn't talk, to a journalist. Because they have had some bad experience in the past of either being misquoted or misrepresented in the media. And many times science is, the lion's share of science in India, at least, and elsewhere in the world, is done by government bodies. And the government has a very tough bureaucratic process for people who want to come and speak to journalists. So they have to have permissions, they have to take the permission of the concerned department or their heads, and etc. So that takes time, and sometimes permissions come 1 week later and your story is dead by then. And so so you have to really make inroads into that kind of tough terrain many times, but over the years one has learned the tricks of how to do that.
Definitely that's a lot of good advice, and more than a lot of good words of confidence. I believe a lot of people are going to find it reassuring that you just don't have to be expert in every nitty-gritty detail, but something I think a lot of us people who tend to follow science become a little obsessed with it. We need to know all the details, but sometimes it's easy not to know and talk to the right people who can fill up the gaps. And I think on that particular note, because scientists sometimes can get a little awry with in terms of their own research. So my next question is actually around the same idea. Should there be a place of science communication in actual academic curriculum? I know some of the top institutions have started to institutionalize it, but Mohit, if you could try to answer that, from your background, that at what place should we institutionalize or organize a science communication course, and how it should look like and what it could be?
So before we go into that, I'll just share a quick anecdote. I did interview a set of faculty members when I was a student, asking them, all academics, asking them what did they understand by the term communication, and what activities in their daily life do they think constitute communication. And the answers that came out were speaking and writing. And as you would realize, it completely misses the two other important aspects, which is of reading and listening. They are reading, they are listening, but they don't interpret that as a part of communication. So I think particularly in the Indian context, when we talk about communication or communication skills, at the end of the day, many of them become English grammar, editing aspects, or more about just speaking or just writing. And if you look at the examinations that students have to give to prove their proficiency in English, be it IELTS, be it TOEFL, they have all the four parts, because communication is a two-way street. So I think the first message that needs to be communicated to students, which is what I try to do in the workshops that I do here, and we will be floating a course next semester as well, is to sensitize them that communication is a two-way street, and it mandatorily involves getting some feedback from whoever their audience is in whatever duration of time, to see whether they have been able to convey their message in an efficient manner or not. Say, when I utter the word differentiation, it means completely different things to a mathematician versus a developmental biologist. And depending on who I'm speaking to, they would create two completely different mental maps of the same word that I just uttered. Then it's my responsibility. It's not their responsibility. It's my responsibility to make sure that the image that I have of that word is as close as possible to the image that they have of that word. And if we can get students who are, relatively less rigid in their approaches of dealing with journalists, as Shubha was pointing out, in the early stages of their career, then I think we can create an ecosystem where there would be more respect to this entire dialogue. And we will hopefully understand that communication is, at the end of the day, about dialogue, about a two-way street. So getting that message, I think, is essential. Others, there are different courses being taught at different institutes, which again, as I said, at the end of the day, boils down to how to write a good abstract or how to write a good manuscript. And there are enough resources online as well available, but they don't communicate the central message that it's the responsibility of the so-called sender to make sure that the so-called receiver has received the message.
Thank you very much, Mohit. I think there are a few good points here. And I believe you can also drop out a link to your course. I think a lot of people here would be interested to enroll if it's available to general people outside of IISc as well. That'll be great. I think, Abhishek, I just want you to perhaps follow up a bit more about on that end. Like, since you're one of the people who carved out from, science to science communication, why don't people more hear about science communication at a university level? Like, how did you find out? Because back in the day, there weren't that many courses. It wasn't as buzzing as it is right now. So perhaps how did you find it out, and how people today can find out, as a viable career option?
I really didn't know about this as a career when I was finishing university. I have to give credit to folks who hired me to do the job, because I just knew that it involved science and it involved writing. And this is very cliched. Everybody will say, I love science, and I have written in my college magazine or my school magazine, and that's why I became a science writer. But it's beyond that. I just felt like, this is probably the closest I can stay to science without doing research work. But it is much tougher than that, because when you're doing your own research, you're communicating it in your own language. It is tough in a way, but also you're talking about your own work. Here, when I started my career as a writer, working on, GSK's pandemic influenza, at that point it was H5N1 and H1N1. COVID was nowhere in the situation, in the picture. But I was trying to write with somebody about their work, right? The physicians. It is very, very difficult to move away. When you're writing your paper, you're an author. When you're writing with somebody, for somebody, you are the writer. So you are essentially trying to ask, and then that's where I think is the similarity with science journalism, because you're going in after having done your groundwork and asking the questions. But why? But how? What does this really mean? So what? Right. And that's where, writing and I think anybody will tell you, whether it's a science communicator, researcher, writing the discussion section of a paper and identifying what table and figure you want to use for what kind of data is always a challenge. So, that's from where I started. And slowly now, it takes years of practice. I mean, I don't think I was pretty impressed by my first draft. But then when it came back from my manager, I mean, I just thought I was in the wrong career. I just thought it was a blunder. And I was like, so much for writing. So, but you persevere because it's a different style, right? And then with journal to journal, it changes. And that's where Mohit says, like reading, right? It's so important, not because you just want to know about things, but you want to adapt styles. Those get embedded into your thought process, right? How does it flow? Is the journal a niche journal, or is it is a more general audience? And New England Journal is not the same as Lancet Oncology. It's not the same as Blood. How do you kind of cater to that? And you need to think about that right up front. So those are things I think that come in. And I think Shubhra mentioned a lot of the skill sets that came in. Now it has much evolved. When I started off in 2007, I think I was the cohort of the first set of publication writers that GSK hired anywhere in the world. And everybody told me I was getting into the wrong profession because it was too niche. And I just thought, no, let me try it out. I mean, and it worked fine. Now we have so many writers, right? So now it's not difficult to find information at all, to be honest with you. There are a lot of writing societies in India, in Europe, and everything is accessible to everybody, by the way. Nobody needs to travel to get this information. A lot of it is free. A lot of universities now have this. And in fact, one of the, maybe a small plug, I'm with some of the like-minded folks from the industry who are of Indian origin, globally situated. We are trying to create a group which actually works just free of cost, not for profit, just working with universities and medical colleges, which may not have the ability or time to really provide these kind of workshops, this kind of training, and to generally work. Because when I was in India, I would work with a lot of oncologists and others. Like Mohit said, I would do workshops where they have to write hands-on abstract writing, okay? But the fun part is not the writing. The fun part is critiquing. Then I would just project it, and we would ask the groups to critique each other's, abstracts. And that's the learning. When you review, that's also when you learn, because you're like, okay, I should not write like this because I think I tend to. That's how I picked up. I write too long sentences. It shouldn't be that way. These are these nuances you slowly get on with. Information is available. I would strongly recommend getting onto LinkedIn and Twitter. I mean, you cannot believe the amount of information if you follow the right people there. I mean, my connections, I'm slowly starting to get, go into connect with, the academy and India, because I really want to partner. I really want to kind of contribute like this time, you got in touch with me through, so Smita. So the idea is that we talk to each other, we communicate. You talk about why not at a college level. There's this, researcher, I don't know if you know about her. I think it's Somdatta, right? She's going to schools in Hyderabad to talk about science communication. There are others who are going to universities. There are some who are visual science communicators. It's not just writing anymore. So I would say information is there. Please look up, connect with the right people. And I don't think anybody says no. So please go ahead and find it. We can't, again, say I can't select science communication as a career any longer because I didn't have the information. We are past that stage.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to say yes, in science communication field, people do not say no, because all three of our panelists said yes in very first time we approached them. So yes, these people are very approachable. So I recommend all of you, if you can get a chance to, go onto the LinkedIn and follow Twitter. We can just start with these three people around here and everybody who shows us a recommendation. And I think before you know it, you will probably start getting and bombarded with everybody who's connected in the field, and all your feed would be cleaned up with the right information on science communication. So that's a bit of advice from my end. And Abhishek, I can totally empathize about the part when you send out the first draft. I sent out my first draft of my paper, and I was so confident that it's going to be a Nature material. It's going to get published in Nature, and when it came back, it's like, let's just quit writing. But the guides and supervisors are so helpful that help them revise, understand, and then improve over and over again. With that. So I think there's a bit of a lot of conversation around actually, that science communication isn't just writing, and I think a lot of people here would actually like to know, right, how they can actually improve their non-written communication skill sets, because that's something I think perhaps we should address here in this point of time.
Sorry, was that for me or for Shubhra?
Actually, I would say it's a bit open to all of you at this point of time. If anybody has any first thought, please go ahead.
Maybe I'll just start off, and I know Shubhra and Mohit can add it. I think as scientists, I think the setup is different, right? You're focusing on your work, you're collaborating with your lab partners, other labs. But I think when you come into the corporate, it's a very different ballgame. And I've seen genuinely some people are like fish in the water. They come in and they are on. And there are some people who really find it a little difficult to think that, oh, I am supposed to do my job, but also help work with somebody else on joint projects, then somebody else is going to review. And then I have to have these multiple calls to kind of address questions, comments. It gets, and then I have to attend trainings, and then I have to do these mandatory SOPs. So the idea is, it's when you come into the corporate, at least the collaborative piece, the communication piece, it's very important to know that you're not working alone, you're working as a team. I think I get these questions a lot of time, that in a lab we are protected, the guide helps us, our seniors help us, there's a safety net. If we fail in corporate, maybe they'll, if we fail, it's going to go wrong, I'm going to lose my job. But that's not how it works. So I think it's all about, just understand that the setup is different. Every place is governed by rules and regulations, best practices and policies. There are regulations around communication, there is regulation around collaboration. So I think this goes into the aspect of how does it help when you get into the corporate. I think I saw one of the questions there. It's very important to understand that it's a team game.
I mean, fantastic. I think at this point of time, I do want to emphasize the idea. Actually, I think Abhishek, which you propagated a while back, and asked to Shubhra and Mohit on that, their thoughts as well, like idea around, visual communication in science, like no more written anymore. And I think visuals are very, very important, both in academia and as well as like journalists as well. Shubhra, would you might just want to, explain how it goes about, and particularly, if you do not have your own background, how do you collaborate with, these visual artists, help them understand science, and at the same time, communicate it in the right fashion for the layman people?
Sure. There's a nice video around this that's on YouTube as well, which was created by the Nature's chief designer, Kelly Cross, and how she worked her designers and infographers to create pieces of visual communication. What is the workflow? Where do the scientists come in? What are the basic things that these designers, who may be many times from a non-science background, how do they communicate with scientists, and where do they find this middle path where the aspects of visual communication are highlighted through the science that we are trying to talk about. So I would urge everybody to go have a look at that video. I could post the link later on the chat, but it's by Kelly Cross, and it's a lovely video of how visualizations happen at Nature. And at the same time, I would say non-written communication is a myth, because for every kind of communication that you have to do, you have to fall back upon some sort of written guide. And that would mean if you're doing a podcast, there would be a script you would follow. If there's an audiovisual material, there would be, again, a script that you would follow. If you are doing visualizations, you would want to put in some amount of written material in those visualizations. So it's great to have the knowledge or the backup of great designs and visualizations and, sort of audiovisual or podcast kind of things. But I would say if you can write well and start there, if you can present your thoughts coherently in a simple manner, that is half the battle won. And then you hop on to the next means of communication, how you want to communicate your thoughts. But I would say a strong background in writing, if not at Pulitzer winning levels, but at a coherence kind of level, that would be something that I would urge. And what was your next question? Was there anything else?
Yeah, it was around like how would you find collaborators specifically?
Oh, yes. Yes. So I would think that what Abhishek mentioned is spot on. On Twitter, on LinkedIn, you find everybody today. So what I do is when I have to look up somebody in, say, a very specialized niche area of biophysics, I would just raid their Twitter followers, and figure out that there's a bunch of biophysicists who are specific in those areas, operating in those areas, and I can reach them very easily. So just go and rate the Twitter list or Twitter followers of anybody who you find interesting, and you will have had done enough for the day. So I think, as Abhishek put it very nicely, we are past that age when we can crib or have an apology for anything, saying we can't find resources, we can't find enough people, we don't know who to reach out to. That's gone. That's past.
I mean, fantastic. Thank you very much, Shubhra. I think, Mohit, I would actually like you to follow up on the same as well, because I mean, in academy, you typically tend to have an approach that you would design your own figures for when you're going for the publications. But at the same time, certain journals such as Nature and Science tends to be like very particular about the quality of their figures. So then, in that case, you work with the editors and the publishing house to make it happen. So could you just explain a bit of your experience in both sides, and which one do you think is more appropriate and should be more promoted in the field?
So these days, many journals encourage or even require what they call a graphical abstract, which is that you convey about your study not in words, but using a figure, which can have some certain words. So one of my students, when I realized he was quite gifted in art and visualization, we started an in-house experiment where he has now designed graphical abstracts for multiple papers from the lab, which are not necessarily connected to what he's working on. And that has been a very rewarding experience because we discuss the main ideas to convey there. And then he comes up with a draft, which then sort of go back and forth. Because, as a scientist, I think this is very well explained in this beautiful book, which I would recommend many of the attendees to take a look at, titled "Don't Be Such a Scientist." And it talks about how, in the scientist profession, you think a lot about accuracy, which is essential, but you tend to miss upon that. In trying to get too accurate, you're actually creating more boredom for the audience in many cases. So you have to do a nice balance of the error of accuracy and the error of boredom, as the author of this book calls it. So that has been, again, just my one experience with my student, and I'm encouraging him to now reach out to completely different areas in science, not only just the kind of work that we do, but other aspects, to sort of challenge himself as well, whether he can cater to his possible future clients if this is a direction that he is thinking as career option later. As far as the requirements of specific journals go, so there are softwares now. The BioRender is one of them, I've heard, where they would, for some subscription fee that you pay, you can actually create visuals relatively easily. And many of them at least act as starting blocks. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time on PowerPoint or whichever other softwares that people use to start from scratch. There are these nuts and bolts which are available, and Nature and Science, the entire series of journals, have fantastic visualizations which can be used for inspiration as well.
My apologies, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Mohit. I think that quite a good points, and particularly references to software as well. I think we are closing on to the time for the breakout rooms, and a lot of audience eager for their questions to be asked. So I would like to go on for one of the fan favorite in the audience. And this is to you, Abhishek, particularly like applying to writing positions in companies like GSK, Novartis is difficult from their own experiences. Like, do you have any particularly career advice on how to break into those companies?
I do make it a point to send across CVs the moment they reach me. That's clear. I think in terms of overarching advice, what I would say is, at least most of these organizations are either on work day or brass ring. So if you find something that is of interest to you, don't send your CV and simply say, can you find a fit for me? I think that becomes very tricky, and it's impossible, because you have multiple things that you are interested in. Possibly you have experiences in different setups, so you need to let the person you're contacting know what you're interested in, what kind of roles you would like. If you don't know about that, don't send the CV. Just say, maybe, have a conversation if that person you're approaching is open. I typically do have a lot of chats across time zones to really talk to people, or I redirect them to some of my contacts who are more amenable to these discussions. So I think somebody asked me in the chat, and I said, I'm happy to redirect. You can get in touch with me. I mean, but science communication is a very small group. It's a very close group, not small group. It's a very close-knit group. So especially also on the pharma side, we all tend to know each other. So we never make enemies, by the way. So you never know who you're going to work with next. So if a CV comes to me, I make sure I ask what the interests are, what kind of time frame he or she is looking in. And then I make it a point not just to send it across to Novartis, but also some of my contacts at these organizations. So you have to understand also, the hiring has, like crop seasons, hiring seasons exist. You can't have hiring end of the year, early in the year. It goes with the budgets. Budgets come and go, hiring come and go. So you have to figure out a sweet spot, probably Q2 in the year, or maybe stay in touch with people when they say, I'll let you know when it comes. I think these are some of the things I would say. Don't send the same CV probably for every role, whether it's medical affairs, whether it's other things. So try and Shubhra, you have a question?
Not a question, after you, please.
Okay, super. So I mean, these are some of the things, and I think I don't deny that, like Shubhra said, there are people who will probably not respond or probably get irritated, but there are also a lot of people who now, we are always looking for good candidates. So please, my boss's boss used to say, if you don't ask, you don't get. Just because I'm saying no doesn't mean you stop asking. Then I feel like you didn't need it in the first place. So keep going.
Thank you very much, Abhishek. Though I think this is a bit of a follow-up from the audience side themselves, and I think personally on my end, I have the same thought. I mean, you have shared a lot of good advice around how people can reach and connect, and most certainly not make enemies. But a lot of this information seems like a lot of tribal knowledge, and once you get inducted, you seem to get to know. But I think a lot of people, the way they're trying is more conventional, like go into the website and see if there are openings, or applying to LinkedIn jobs. So is the way you're suggesting, like, doing cold calls with the right people, is this the better way out, or should people have more options in the more traditional, applying to a position approach as well?
I'll be honest with you, websites, the direct company websites, it's tough. But I said Brastring and Workday and also LinkedIn. A lot of companies, most companies now do post their positions on LinkedIn. It's now a norm. So I think that's the starting point. If you tell somebody at GSK, it's like somebody comes and tells me, I really like this job with this job code, can you refer? It's just a 2-second task for me. So I don't mind doing that. But if you put something in the website, I doubt, the generic website of an organization, I'm not sure it's going anywhere. And also the other point, I think Shubhra had a point, so I'll pause here. I'm not saying everybody will say yes and give me and I'm going to send it. Not everybody. There are people who are going to do that. It's a matter of asking them.
Okay, most certainly. Ask and you shall get. I think that's an apt summary. Shubhra, would you like to just follow up? I think you had some ideas here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, saying Abhishek already said that about how to approach people. When you're sending an email or even a LinkedIn request or something, you just don't end up saying, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm doing this. Can you give me some career advice, or can you put me to the right people, or can you give me a job?" Worse, so. Things like what you really need to put into that first pitch is something that will go a long way in proving how your application or your request navigates itself. So I would think, your strong points, of course, and how you might be a good fit, because you don't always say that I'm looking for a job. It could always sometimes be like Abhishek is already doing pro bono stuff. Many times when you're doing something voluntarily for somebody for the first time and saying, look, I saw so and so, for instance, article on Nature India, it would have done great with a graphic. Can I just send you a graphic and say, will you use it? If I could send you a graphic alongside that article. So it already shows what exactly you can do, and you are not there just to explore your job market suitability, but also as a passion. You're providing something as proof for the next career goal that you want to achieve. So I would think that things like those, we come on career advice, guidance, or webinars or stuff like this without any expectations, right, from anybody. So I would say when people at this stage of their career are willing to come out and help you, you might also want to reciprocate by doing that as beginners, So, I met Mohit, for instance, for the first time when he was running Nerd, and he invited me to have a discussion with the people at IIT Kanpur. So that was what, 10 years back, or can't remember. So that's how we first met, and I traveled to Kanpur, and I had such a wonderful discussion with the people who were running that students magazine. So you may not always want to have a ready-made ecosystem, but you can create your own ecosystem, like Mohit did with that magazine. Nobody told him to go create a magazine. Nobody said science communication is what you should pursue. He did it because he loved it, and he may have got some support from his seniors to start off something like that. And he then brought in all of us, people who were interested or who could guide or who could offer some 2 pence advice at that point of time. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying make that first out call or pitch such that it resonates.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Shubha. That's some important points. And I think that just applies not just in science communication, but across all sectors of career building, I think. And if I may be able to summarize your words, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's like when you reach out to people, make yourself more relevant and relatable. Because that's what helps, do cold calls, but don't be cold in your calls. Warm them up with relevant information, make your case. I think that's very important because that helps. Because a lot of times I think juniors, when I was a junior, like very much younger in my journey, I was using like, I'm just a young person. I don't know enough. Like, I don't have anything else to offer, not to tell. And, why don't these people help me out? It's like everybody's willing to help out. They just don't know right thing for you. So I think that's probably very, very generous and useful about, make yourself
Yeah,
relatable when you teach
I
it.
think today we should rename cold calls as warm calls. That's a good one.
Okay, so we'll be like starting, working on the last question before we open the breakout room and let the very excited audience to have more one-on-one session with all of you. And this is open to all three of you, whoever feels like, best position to answer this. And there's this increasing trend of, publishing data quickly, and there are a lot of predatory publishing platforms, and unfortunately, quite a few of them in India itself. Like, what are your, open thoughts about this particular bit? All three of you, like anybody who would like to take.
Shun them.
Shandam seems
They're
like
not very difficult to spot though, to be honest. I mean, and Shubhra knows this. I mean, you'll see the emails itself can raise flags. They're asking you to write anything under the sun. They're asking you to write on a topic which you're not remotely associated with, spelling mistakes. Then you go to the website, you just see it's a mess. Sometimes if you have a doubt, and if one of those flags are raised, you make sure that you check the editorial team and whether at all they exist, where are they located. And if there's an urgency to publish, I cannot not mention preprints these days. I think it's still a growing trend, but I do talk a lot about it. From the pharma side, it's obviously not caught on yet. There are limitations and issues, but on the research side, I think they give you, because they give you a DOI. They are citable. They can still, journals are now open to accepting preprints, as long as you don't put the final version there. There are a lot of things. So I mean, speed alone could not be now an excuse to get caught up in the web of predatory journals. And there are predatory congresses as well, right? So they ask you to be the keynote speaker. I mean, you are the one. Your day is made. You know that you're the chosen one. So, and then that goes downhill. Some predatory journals use very similar names. That is tricky. You submit and then you're caught because you're going to get asked for $10,000 and you cannot withdraw. They'll publish it and you can't publish it elsewhere. So I think that is something you need to be cautious about.
I mean, I think that's two very important points that Abhishek, I think, mentioned about, preprints are a way to fast research because you don't want to get scooped up. I think that's one big worry for a lot of people. And second, never give them money and never let them publish your work. Once your name gets attached, it's just dirt all around. I think Abhishek, you mentioned very good point, and I know, let's say, mixed words like just shun them, and I think that's a very fantastic approach. But Mohit, I think I would like to take your opinion here because perhaps you work most closely with young scientists, and I think one of the gold standard for identifying predatory journals these days, like Beale's list, I think, and while that covers a lot of name, it doesn't cover all their name because it doesn't get updated soon. But I think there's a lot of controversy around open science journals because some of them ends up becoming borderline around there, and I think that's where a lot of people get caught. And what do you think around it? And is this a reality we have to live with and hit and miss, or is there a better model which can come up in open science community as well? Because personally speaking, I love the idea of open science and do not and hate the predatory pricing which comes with the top journals, but at the same time, it cannot come at the cost of scientific repute. So Mohit, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. So begin with what Abhishek was saying, that they use very similar names, right? So once I got an invitation to publish in a journal called Nature and Science, and they were charging only $5,000, and I had a conversation with my advisor that even if we pay $5,000, we'll not be able to publish in Nature and in Science separately. So let's just publish it. I mean, in this case, it seemed like a good business deal. But anyway, jokes apart. So in these open science part, and so many respected academic societies and their journals are coming up with an open access journal. And when you say submit to a family of journals belonging to a publisher, they would usually respond back saying that, look, your work is not suitable or general enough, or one of those cliche statements, to this particular journal where you have submitted. But why don't you try out a new journal that we are just launching, and so on? Because they want to make sure that your article finds a place, and in this new business model where instead of charging from subscriptions, they're charging from authors. they do get the amount of money that they are looking for in this for-profit venture, right? So in those particular cases, many journals do offer good amount of many reasonable journals, many respected journals do offer good amount of discounts on article processing fees, especially if you tell them that, look, you don't have the money to pay, and that's clearly a sign of a non-predatory journal, because a predatory journal would not do that. So you can just, when you get such an email, just respond to them. I don't have the money. Will you still publish? And the response will tell you, largely speaking, as to what is going on. I mean, clearly, if it's a journal published by a society, a journal, as Abhishek was saying, which has a respected editorial board, a journal which has been around for a few number of years, is listed in PubMed, etc., for biology journalism we are talking here, then those automatically sort of, get ruled out, that these are not predatory journals. Now, whether open access is the best strategy, I don't know. But again, going back to what Abhishek was saying, you can put up the work on preprint, you can keep updating it. And while that does not give you as much respect as having it published in a peer-reviewed journal, and you always get this comment that it's not peer-reviewed, which is, does not earn you the points that a peer-reviewed publication would when it comes to evaluations in the academic atmosphere. But there's no rush. You can wait for, you can submit to journals which do not charge this amount of money, and there are a large number of such journals as well, published by academic societies who are not looking to make profit, but actually trying to have a good peer-reviewed support ecosystem for the entire academic community.
I mean, thank you, Mohit. I think I just have two questions I've always been willing to ask for people in this field about open science, and I think I've got you today. I just want to follow it up. So if you talk about like Jeffrey Bale himself, who came up with the idea of predatory list, he has been very, very against the idea of open science themselves. And one of the problem has been always been cited is the conflict of interest, because you pay, journals sometimes have the incentive, to slip down the integrity of the work or the peer review they want to do, because they somewhat owe you something or something like that in return for the money. And also the prices sometimes can be very high. So is it affordable for a country like India to actually pay for open science publication work? And at the same time, what about this conflict of interest, and has that come up in your experience so far?
So conflict of interest, going by that definition, can also exist for certain society journals, which also charge some amount of money. And certain society journals do tell you that, they would allow their members to have more rounds of revisions than non-members, right? Because, I think that argument is sort of two-sided. It's a different business model, whether you subscribe to it or not is the author's choice. That's what I would leave to it. And that depends on affordability and so on, other factors that you just mentioned. I have not done the math whether open access for a set of journals provided for a set of institutions, whether that would end up to be cheaper, because at the end of the day it's a business model, than getting subscriptions, whether this is something that the universities, perhaps the funding agencies and the publication houses will all come on board with. But I've heard anecdotal experiences, such as I think universities of California formed a consortium and said that a particular publisher, I'm blanking out on the name, they would not charge them money exorbitantly for publishing there. So there are some solutions being worked out. I don't know the technical details. Plan S is something I've been hearing on Twitter. Again, I don't know the details of the financial and logistic details of it, but there are other solutions being worked out in different ecosystems.
Thank you very much, all three of you, Mohit, Shubhra, and Abhishek. So we'll now be stopping the panel discussion and opening up the breakout room, where we'll be providing audience the opportunity to have more one-on-one discussions with each one of you. So before we kickstart the breakout rooms, there's just one or two pieces of advice we would like to share how this entire model works. So with the breakout room, what we want to do is for all the audience member to provide a bit more backstage experience, which you would have found in an offline setting. So here you would have an opportunity to talk to these three panelists one-on-one. We'll be assigning you into breakout room based on the questions you have asked in the registration form originally, but you will have full flexibility to move from one room to another at any point of time, maybe 5 minutes, 15 or half an hour at your pleasure. And if you find any technical difficulties, please let me or any of the team members from IBLoT know, and we'll just help you out navigate the rooms. So Srinath here would be opening up the breakout room right now. So in around next 1 to 2 minutes, you'd be getting a notification to join a particular breakout room. Panelists will be moving you to respective rooms manually. Just please bear with us for a couple of minutes. So Srinath, please go ahead and open the rooms.
Thanks, Varshit. And I think everyone will get an invitation. Panelists, you too. You can just head on the invitation. All right. Thanks, guys. Varshit, can you join the room with Abhishek?
Yeah, I'm joining.
I'll be here in the main room.
Yeah.
If you guys have any difficulties, let me know. Who is on the call currently? Krishna, Amrita, Satyaraju. I can manually shift you guys as well.